Welcome back to the Irish Mags Show, episode 60, believe it or not, listeners. And what a show we have in store today. I'm Paul, and alongside myself and Alan this week is a very special guest who we've been looking forward to having on the show. Making his Irish Mags Show debut is sports broadcaster, Newcastle United reporter for both the Premier League and the BBC. Welcome in, Mr. Andy Sixsmith. How are you doing there, sir? Good to have you here.
I mean, I'm very, very privileged to be on the 60th episode. That's cracking. 60.
Yeah, we're literally pushing retirement age, Andy. So you're very welcome to join us to celebrate that time.
I feel like it after the weekend.
I think we all do. Yeah, I think we all do. That was an exhausting game, which we'll come to very shortly. Because on this week's show, we're going to do a little pulse check with Andy, talking about the work that he does, chatting about the season so far. Hopefully just a blip at the weekend, which ended our 9-game winning streak. So we're going to get Andy's thoughts on that. And we might just have a little chat about the Premier League season overall, Andy, as well, because there's a lot of surprises happening when you look at the league table currently, including ourselves to an extent, really. So it'd be interesting to hear your take on it. And if there's time before you go, we're going to try and just squeeze some information out of you, some trade secrets or top secret info. And once it's out there, folks. Andy, first question for you. We always ask our guests this question. Do you have any Irish connections? And or have you ever been to Ireland? Or if you actually secretly hate Irish people, now would be a great time to
No, I'm going to tour the party line and say I absolutely bloody love Ireland. So I'm going to say two things about Ireland. I personally do not have any family from Ireland. My fiance has Irish blood on her, so she's South African by birth. She moved to Wales when she was 14, then moved to Newcastle when she was 21. So she's been in Newcastle now near 10 or 11 years, but she does have Irish blood on her side of the family. So that's one connection that I have, as well as the fact that two of my best mates had their stag do's in Dublin. So it's getting a bit more tenuous here.
Naturally, yeah.
And my stag do will be in Dublin as well, and hopefully out in Dalkey as well. Which
Dalkey, very fancy.
Bloody love Dalkey. We went and dived off the cliff there, me and Rebecca, in the summer, and it was bloody beautiful. So yeah, I'm bound to say this on the Irish Mags Show, but I absolutely bloody love Ireland.
Happy days, exactly what we're
And he's just invited all of us to join him on his stag, which is exactly when it goes.
It's probably early part of 2026, so I'll be in touch. Don't worry about it.
Excellent. Well, if there happens to be a game on that Saturday, you'll have to swing by the Newcastle HQ, which is the Bleecker Street Bar in Dublin, where we have basically we've taken over the upstairs of a pub that's ran by a good friend of ours, Johnny Leahy. So
you can't just drop this information. Bleecker Street Bar.
Yes,
Bleecker Street
I'm
Bar.
not sure. If there's a game on, I'm coming there on my stag.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I tell you what, so we do meetups there all around the country, really, in Cork, in Limerick, in Galway, Mayo, Sligo, wherever. But Dublin is kind of the main one, obviously the bigger place, the bigger set of the Irish Mags fans. And I was actually there a few weeks ago, but literally every weekend we have Geordies just randomly arriving who are in Dublin for the weekend. They Google it.
Constant stag do's.
Yeah, this is what I love about Newcastle. The fact is that you could go to, I don't know, you could go to Cork or Dublin. You could go to Atlanta, Georgia in the States. You could go to Cape Town in South Africa. And you are bound to bump into a Newcastle fan and probably a Geordie somewhere along the line. We're inevitable. We're like Alex Isak or Bournemouth.
The kit helps as well because it just stands out. You cannot miss the black and white kit. When compared to all those silly red teams that everybody follows for no reason.
Especially now that they've brought back the kit.
Kits,
the kit,
absolutely.
And well, I'm sure we'll come on to that in a little bit, but I sadly don't have £90 and I still actually have mine from 90 whatever it is.
Oh, you have an original one. Nice.
So it's still there somewhere. I don't know where it is at the minute, but
I'm the same. I still have my 95-96 with Ginola 14 on the back. I mean, I would say it does fit, but it's a bit like probably more like a belly top at this point. Sleeves are still big because you remember the massive sleeves. They were down to my wrist when I was a kid, but unfortunately, the rest of it doesn't go down as far as it needs to cover.
Tell you what, Paul, you can wear that in Bleecker Street Bar round about January 2026 on my stag do. You can walk in that fella, and you won't have to buy me a drink.
That's a good deal.
Wow, that's an offer then. Yeah, all your mates can buy me a drink then instead. We'll show you how the Irish do. You may live to regret this.
They're all tight, man. They're not going there, but yeah, that's fine.
Fair. And then moving on to your, let's say, your career, I suppose, is where we'd like to start then, Andy. Obviously, working with I suppose basically it's the Northeast reporter for the Premier League. For the purposes of this podcast, you're the Newcastle reporter for the Premier League and the BBC.
Yes.
Could you maybe talk to us about your career path? How did you get into broadcasting and media? Was it something you always wanted to do as a kid? And how did it get from where you were to now?
You know what? First things first, I'm going to say something that's probably deeply unpopular on this podcast, but yeah, Newcastle reporter for Premier League. I genuinely would love nothing more than Sunderland and latterly as well, Middlesbrough, to come up to the Premier League once again, for us to have 3 Northeast teams in there. Obviously, Sunderland for obvious reasons, but you just miss the derby, don't you? In the Premier League. FA Cup, fine, whatever. They can deck out the stadium alike in black and white, all they like. But we all know that Sunderland don't get past the 3rd round of the FA Cup. So the chances of meeting, and to be fair, neither do Newcastle that often. So the chances of meeting there are slim. So I'd love to see them up in the Premier League. And Middlesbrough as well, because I am one of those weird sorts of people that just like to see all Northeast teams doing really, really well. Not because it helps me out in terms of my job.
Well, you'd be a busy man if all 3 of them landed in the Premier League. That much.
Yeah, be torn between 3 different areas. But to be fair, going back to your question, where did I start? I've always been like a huge sports person. Like ever since the age of like 3 or 4, I would be kicking a ball, I'd be hitting something, I'd be catching a ball, whatever it might be. And you know what? Everyone kind of says, "Oh, we went into football because of, I don't know, potential money, or we just love playing up with our mates." I went into swimming, which is just not the sport that you go into for financial gain or anything. But I just ended up being really decent at swimming and got up to a decently high level, like nationals, etc., etc. I was never good enough to make it to, like GB in the Olympics or anything like that. But I was always there or thereabouts. So I swam up at the age of like 15, 16, was into my football from a young age, and then realized that I was never going to make it actually being an athlete. And I thought, well, what I want to do is I'm good at 2 things in this world. I'm decent at sport and I'm good at talking absolute bullshit. So what can I do?
Might be Irish.
that's where Rebecca's family comes in. But yeah, I kind of thought what amalgamates the 2, and sports broadcasting was it. And I remember, weirdly enough, telling my mum, who one of my probably my best friend in this entire world, and I told her that I wanted to be a sports broadcaster, and she was like, "Do you not remember when you were like 5 years old?" And I'm going to go to you here, Paul, because those Corinthian figures right in your background, I used to, as a kid, play football with Newcastle figures, Manchester United figures, whoever else, Chelsea, Arsenal, whatever else they were.
On the Subbuteo match. That's what I used to do, on the Subbuteo match, yeah.
And I on the floor of my bedroom, and I would, from the age of like 7 or 8, commentate and report on games that I made up. It's so... I'm hearing myself say this, and I'm like, you loser. When you used to do that as a kid, when you were like 8, 9, these other kids going out there playing football, I can't, just in case I get injured for swimming. So I stay inside and commentate on little figurines on my floor. But I got right into it.
I assume you didn't lead with that when you met your fiancée for the first time.
You know what? She finds that quite endearing for some unknown reason. So it's not the worst story I could ever tell, and I'm not going to tell them on this podcast. That would definitely put anyone off me. But yeah, that's how I kind of like knew. So even at the age of 17, 18, I was like, I want to be a sports broadcaster. So I decided I was going to go to uni, and I did law because I followed my brother into it, because I just thought, you know what, it's good reputation. You can go and use that as, I don't know, like chat blinds, I suppose. It's got lots of money in the industry, and it'll be really interesting. I was wrong on all 3 fronts, and I ended up just going to uni and having a really, really good time swimming there, like with the swim team and everything like that. Just had a really, really good time. And then when I came to the end of my undergrad, I was like, right, I want to go into sports broadcasting. So eventually did my master's, went to local television, a group called Made Television, Made in Tyne, and we spent 2 years there. Made one of my best mates there, Johnny Smith, who's a sports producer now, who's done very, very well for himself since leaving Made. I'm now, his child's my godson. So that was the best thing that came out of Made. And also like just exposing myself to sports broadcasting in general on a local scale. Decided to leave there after I just thought I'd hit the ceiling. I'd done as much as I wanted to there, done as much as I could do, and went freelance. And to be honest, lads, it was probably the most like terrifying moment of my life going freelance. Like there was no discernible income coming in, and just out of nowhere, a guy called Tony Hogan rang me up from Premier League Productions, who I'd heard of, but they were huge, and I never thought I would ever take the step up to them, because for anyone who doesn't know PLP, we broadcast in every single country bar the UK and Russia and one other, I think. Russia for obvious reasons. But I can't remember what the other country is, but we broadcast like 1 billion people worldwide on various different broadcast channels like Fox, and you start as Star Sports in India, Fox Sports in Australia, etc., etc. So I'd heard of how big they were, and Tony he doesn't work there anymore, but Tony came up to me and like gave me an opportunity there, which I'll still thank him for this day, 2017. And I've been there ever since. They've still stuck with me, which I can't quite believe that they've done that. But stuck with PLP, and then BBC came in, Sport and Final Score. Ben North came in for me and said, would you be interested in working for us for Final Score? And I'd watched that since the age of like 4 or 5 years old school grandstand with my dad. And yeah, that was it. And ever since then, that's been me. I've had loads of people say, why didn't you move down to Manchester or London? And Manchester or London isn't Newcastle. Nope. So why would I want to move to Manchester or London? Absolutely. The only other city I've moved to is Dublin. But
great answer.
I think it was a good call. I mean, for good or for bad, it's never boring, I would imagine, especially doing any kind of reporting on what's going on in Newcastle. Obviously, we had some grim times and there was challenging times, but never a dull day, I suppose. And yeah, you mentioned 2017, so we're looking at kind of 7-8 years. A lot's happened in that last 7 years, 8 years. So,
like you know what everyone asks us, what's the best thing about like the takeover? You must be delighted because now Champions League and fighting for European and everything like that. It must be great. And I'm like, you know what the best part about it is? Not having to worry about us being relegated or in a relegation battle. And I know that sounds really limited, but my job would have gone if they went down in PLP. So.
Yeah,
that is. I mean, people don't really think about that element of it. What relegation does to people, even outside the club, from a professional perspective as well. So, and unfortunately, it did happen twice in the last 10, 15 years. So we have reason to be traumatized by it.
No, it didn't. We've blanked that out completely. It never happened.
Never happened. We've always.
It was great.
We've always been class. We've always been we've always been great at football. No,
we would never have had no Diame against Brighton. We would never have had any of that if we hadn't made it to the championship. So
there'd be no Shefki Kuki. Right, let's move on very quickly from that.
Nostalgia.
Best interview or production you've ever done, I suppose, specific to Newcastle, seeing as where you are. I've seen you doing interviews with the likes of Dan Byrne, Eddie Howe, various different. Obviously, you've done a lot over the last few years, but any particular highlights in terms of production?
You know what? Straight up, like this is normally a really difficult question to answer, and it would have been difficult until about 3 years ago. Eddie Howe's first interview. And it's not even close. It's, I'll tell you why, because it's not from the point of view that it was Eddie's first interview. He's done exactly what he's done, which is an incredible job at Newcastle United. And I'm sure at the point of the next 10, 15 minutes, I'm probably going to go on to a 5-minute diatribe about how wonderful Edward Howe is for Newcastle as a person, as a manager. I love the bloke to bits. But more importantly, the reason I say straight away that first interview was he walked into the home dressing room, which is where we were doing it. We'd set up our kind of miniature studio. And he walked in, and for the first 5 minutes, we literally had a conversation about where it was best to walk his dog in Newcastle. And you know what? I remember looking at him and thinking, this is such an unassuming, humble, decent bloke. And he immediately wanted to know from me, he immediately picked up a little bit, not much. I've got a bit of a weird hybrid accent going on between Geordie and Yorkshire, where half my family are from. But he picked up a little bit of the accent, and when he's from here, I want to know about the city. I want to know about the places to go with my dog, with my kids, everything like that. And we talked for about 5 minutes, and eventually we realized we had to actually start recording and talk about football. But I thought, what a genuinely lovely, down-to-earth bloke this person is. And then obviously it transpires that he's a bloody good manager as well, which has helped. And he's written himself, I think, personally, into Newcastle United history, even without winning a trophy yet. Touch wood.
It was quite important. Like, it was quite an important interview because there was eyebrows raised and there was all this Unai Emery talk at the time, People were like, oh, are we really hiring Eddie Howe? So it was quite a big interview in terms of what it meant really for fans.
It was, and you know what? There was skepticism at the start, and you do expect that a little bit because, you know, with all due respect to Eddie, had he had the kind of the trophies and the luminary career that Unai Emery had, no, and that was so close to going through. So there was part of me that felt a little bit like, not sorry for him, but a bit like, you know, you're going to have these questions of, you're not Unai Emery, you're Eddie Howe. And you know what? As well as Unai has done at Aston Villa and did at Villarreal and everything around there, less so about Arsenal. But my God, that was the right decision. How that worked out has just worked out perfect. I don't think, with all due respect to Unai and the brilliant manager that he is, I don't think he would have been anywhere near as good a fit as Eddie Howe has been for Newcastle, not just because of his managerial ability, but because of the sort of person that Eddie is. And he has been so wonderful in not just getting us to the Champions League, League Cup final, etc. Those great days, you know, as Newcastle fans and broadcasters over the last 3 years. But I think the biggest thing about him is the fact that he's united a city and a club again in many ways that I could argue that 99% of managers worldwide could not have done. And he has done that. And that is why he is still my number one interview that I've done at Newcastle. Rafa came close. Rafa was brilliant. But Eddie's top. Eddie is top.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was actually that interview. It was one of his early interviews where he did talk about the journey he'd been on while he wasn't working. And he talked about where he was with Diego Simeone, and he was basically traveling around the place and kind of honing his skills. But you can see the difference, you know, from a coaching perspective. The impact he's made on specific players is crazy. And like you said, I don't think Unai Emery would have had that impact on what was like a legacy squad that he inherited and had to work with. And look where it got him, you know, and a lot of them are still there.
He was good at Bournemouth. Like, don't get me wrong, Eddie was fantastic at Bournemouth. The stuff that he did for Bournemouth is incredible, not just for a manager, a player as well. I always loved that story that the fans raised like £16,000, I think it was, to bring him back to the club at one point as a player. And then obviously he moved straight into management. He was almost kicked into management. And I don't think anyone could have guessed Eddie would have been as good a manager. But I've never met anyone as fastidious and as... Yeah, it got raised at the press conference the word boring, and I was like, no, I knew it was a joke. It was a complete.
I can't believe it was asked. I heard that. Yeah,
it was a joke, or said jokingly. But I was like, I know that's the perception of Eddie probably from outside circles. But honest to God, I can quite safely say he's the least boring person. I think he's a really genuinely funny, dry sense of humor sort of bloke, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege not just to interview him and in press conferences one-to-one, but just to get to know him a little bit. And I stress that phrase, a little bit, as a person over the last 3 years. He's been an absolute joy to work with.
Just on press conferences, I'm sure you've heard a few mad ones and a few great ones. What's the best and what's the worst question? Not necessarily to a Newcastle, but just in general, what's the best or worst question you've heard?
Oh my God. This isn't a question. But there was the Steve McLaren press conference with Craig, and Craig went in on Steve McLaren. That was like, whoa! I was really like wet behind the ears at that point as well, and you know, that sort of thing. It was incredible. The kind of but it was brutal. So that moment really sticks in. Any question that's been asked? It's probably one of mine. Probably one of mine. Asked him about. I know that sounds like a really easy.
Which question do you regret asking the most? That should have been the question.
You know what? I don't even regret asking him this, but looking back on it, it was a ridiculous question to ask, and it was right in the middle of a bit of patchy run of form that they were on, and some bloke had got a tattoo with him on his arse or like top end of his thigh or something like that. And I texted Eddie actually a few days before and said, "Have you seen this? That, you know, a fan's got a tattoo of you." And he was like, "It's very, very good. That's impressive." And I thought, fuck it, I'm just going to ask him it in the press conference, like as an and final, because I don't PLP. We can't deal in speculation. We can't deal in anything like that. So I've got to be a bit more creative in my questioning, and I've always been the type of person that just likes to have the different line, something a bit more humanistic, something a bit more, because we treat managers and players like they're up on this pedestal, like they're aliens, like they're different people. They're not. They're just human beings who are doing the jobs. So ask them decent human being questions, and you'll usually, unless Ange Postecoglou, who's been a bit annoyed recently, hasn't he? You'll get a humanistic sort of answer. And I asked him about the tattoo, and he was like, I just pity the bloke who's gone and got my face on him for the rest of existence. So, yeah, that's probably the worst one that I've heard that. It was
worth it.
Someone asked me the other week about Oasis. And
ask him about the Oasis tickets, and he had to say, I like their albums in the 90s and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Oasis fan personally, but Oasis Manchester, like, if that was the Man City or the Manchester United manager, I'd understand it. And I've asked Eddie about Sam Fender numerous enough times.
Yeah.
But there's a Newcastle connection there. So that was a bit like a sort of
almost question. Like somebody forgot their question and just thought of what's the most topical thing happening right now, and it was bloody Oasis.
You know what, Paul, mate? Probably. And the number of times I've forgotten the question I'm about asking a press conference, who am I to judge anyone else? So
yeah,
but yeah, it's probably one of mine, the worst ones. I would have said.
That's not a bad one, though, in fairness. I'm sure Eddie enjoyed it, although the fact that tattoo exists probably haunts him ever so slightly. Right, we've got you for another 10 minutes, let's say. So I just want to get a couple more questions out of you, Andy, as well.
Yeah.
I suppose topical for where we are right now. I think we're less than 2 weeks until the end of the transfer window. From let's say a working perspective, a professional's perspective, even a personal perspective, what's the window like for you in your role? Because obviously different journalists deal with things like speculation and rumors and all of that. What's your job like now in the transfer window? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Do you want it to close, or is there a lot?
You know what? I want this January transfer window to close.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's literally just who's going. I mean, there's the Miggy Almiron saga going back to Atlanta, which looks like it's going to go ahead now. We've had the Martin Dubravka saga. We've then had the Vlad saga as well. With what was it? Al Shabab, was it?
Al Shabab.
Al Shabab, yeah.
Who were linked with Dubravka and then went, can't have him. Let's move on to the next goalkeeper at Newcastle. And then I hate to be that person, but I mean, I would. What are we on? 22nd of January, 8-9 days to go. I would be absolutely shocked if Newcastle made a sign. And it comes down to those awful, the awful three initials, and that is PSR. Yeah. Like, it just is not the right time for Newcastle to go big. They don't have the capabilities, I don't think, to go big in the transfer market, sadly. And that is just the PSR world. Aston Villa have found this out this season. Obviously, they lost Moussa Diaby out to Saudi Arabia. Nottingham Forest, as well as I hope that they do this season, I hope they finish behind Newcastle, but I'd love to see them make Champions League. Nottingham Forest will encounter that as well next season. And it's just like, you want someone to go and realistically challenge, the perceived top 2, top 3, top 4 all the time. So yeah, from a January transfer window perspective, 8-9 days to go, I'd be shocked to see Newcastle have too many incoming. Who knows? I'm not an in-the-know journalist. I don't like that phrase ever. It's not my particular role, which kind of leads me on to your question. Previously at PLP, we used to have kind of like programming, so transfer deadline day shows. And that first transfer window for Takeover, when we signed Trips, we signed Bruno, we signed Dan, that was absolute, Matt Target as well. That was absolutely class. I have never been busier in terms of broadcasting. It was amazing because we had 2 shows that went out worldwide that time before programming changed at PLP. And literally, I think I saw my producer and heard our presenters' voices more than I did my family's voices back then, because it was just something different every single day. So that was great. Yeah. But these days, I kind of just, I slip into the background when it comes down to transfer windows. I let the very, very best do their thing, the likes of Keith and Craig and Luke and, the local reporters on the beat who do a very, very good job. Not that many would agree with you on Twitter, probably, but let's not talk about that.
No, exactly.
But yeah, it's one of those things where they're just passing on information that they hear, and they do a very, very good job of it. My kind of role is a little bit more orientated towards match days, press conferences, player interviews with the players, which is, to be honest, one of my favorite things to do anyway. So that works well for me. So I apologize for such a boring answer.
No, but I think it's a realistic answer. I think you have to. I came into this window and I was like, oh, we need to do something, right? And obviously we've had this unbelievable run that's put us in a great place. And I am a big advocate of kind of, when the chips are up, when things are going well, that's a great time to potentially lure someone in, and actually make sure we're getting where we're about to go. But that logical part of me that's been brainwashed by all of the talk about PSR and finances and all of the wonderful things, in 5 months time, that calendar end of June will close.
Yeah.
And then suddenly what we'll be able to do on the 1st of July would be very different probably to what we can do right now.
It's
and
whether you keep your
to kind
dry. It's whether you keep your powder dry for that and go big and sort of look. How many times have we been in the January transfer window, not Newcastle, but any club, and gone out and made a real difference-making signing? I think I can count on one hand probably the number of times that's happened for a Premier League side. It has happened, but it doesn't happen all too often. There's less and less value with every growing year in January. And I'm not saying that to say it's okay if we don't sign anyone. I was the same as you, Paul. From a personal perspective, I would have loved Newcastle to have gone out and signed someone in January, whether that be a right winger, whether it be a defender, whether it be a goalkeeper, whatever it might have been. I would have liked to have seen, someone else come in. But sometimes you've just got to kind of look at it and go, that is not the reality that we're playing with in this PSR-driven world currently. And it's a really sad thing. And you know what? I'll rant about PSR. The one thing that I actually really hated about it isn't the fact that Newcastle are not in a great position to sign anyone. It's the players that you lose. And you know what?
Yeah.
One player in particular, not our midfield's been wonderful, obviously, in the last few weeks, and the balance has seemed to be struck now. But Elliot Anderson, that was a right knacker to lose Elliot. And I'm so delighted he's doing well at Forest because he's a cracking lad. And he's a cracking player as well. And he just never had that injury-free run at Newcastle to really drive his stake home for a place in the first team. Starting 11 anyway. And he's gone to Forest and done a wonderful job. And we had to lose him because of PSR. And it's just frustrating, but it is what it is. But January transfer,
it is what it is. And if we keep talking about it, it'll keep making us upset. So whenever we get to this point, we need.
I don't want to make an Irish fan cry on an Irish Mags podcast.
We've enough to be crying about. It's a good segue, though, I suppose, into last weekend because you mentioned Anderson. Both Anderson and Minta both scored at the weekend. While on the other side of things, we went and unexpectedly got a bit of a hiding at Bournemouth. So I suppose just to get your kind of a pulse check, Andy, on obviously an amazing run. We've put ourselves in a really good position now. I'm sure most of us would have taken 5th in the league at this point in time, level on points with Man City, only separated by a couple of goals, which is just surprising. But do you think, are you looking at this and saying this is just a blip, put it in the past, move on? Yeah. Or do you think this could there be a knock-on effect, obviously going away to Southampton at the weekend?
100%. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, and the players will not use this as an excuse, and they didn't. I called it with Dan Byrne post-match, and Dan was the perfect person to speak to because I knew he'd be honest. I knew he'd be straight up front about, the reasons behind that game. But you've got to kind of remember, and you alluded to it there, Paul, they're at the end of a 9-game winning streak. And they've not just done that, they've gone through in the FA Cup, albeit with a change side against a League Two outfit. And Bromley is spirited as they were. They had that tough game down at the Emirates. They were away from home a lot. I mean, that run where they had Manchester United, Tottenham, Arsenal as well. That was absolutely insane, that run. And fatigue none of them will use this as an excuse or a reason. But fatigue set in the last 20 minutes of the Wolves performance. Newcastle were clear about that point. And they looked leggy. They looked leggy on Saturday and, mentally fatigued a little bit as well. That's a tough bit. Don't get me wrong, Bournemouth, can I just say, what a wonderful setup that they have at Bournemouth. And Andoni Iraola has worked wonders. On the pitch, off the pitch, they had 12 fit first-team players on Saturday. And that is, and this has been said numerous times, that's the best performance I've seen from a visiting team to St James Park. Not just this season, I would say last season. In the context of the fact they had 12 fit players and kids, with all due respect, on the bench that had just over an hour's Premier League experience between them. I mean, they didn't have anyone off the bench, apart from maybe Daniel Jevison towards the end. Yeah. I thought they were magnificent. We had Tino Livramento for a sit-down interview this afternoon. And, Tino said exactly what Dan did. they were excellent, and they outworked us at St James's, and that's tough to take because no one outworks Newcastle, like not recently in Eddie Howe's history.
I just thought I was at the game myself, and at one stage I genuinely had to look and was like, do these only have 11 players on the pitch? Because it looked like every time we had the ball, there was 3 Bournemouth players around us, and I was like, it's like they 14 players on the pitch. We couldn't get near them.
And they got, you know what, Alan, they got it so right. And a press, without getting into the intricacies of the tactics, because God knows I'm not a tactics man, but like a press, if you even get it just that much off, it can go wrong. Their press just clicked from second one, and I turned around to my floor manager. I said to him, "We're in for a tricky game here." I always thought maybe we might sneak a 1-0 or a 2-1, but honestly, they came to play and they were superb, every single one of their players. So I think, going back to your question, Paul, I think you've got to look at it for a blip for that reason, but another reason being, how many times has this Newcastle United team under Eddie Howe been written off? And thankfully, I haven't seen after the weekend. I think the majority, if not all, the Newcastle fans turned around and went, you know what, it was an off day for us. Bournemouth were fantastic. Let's move on to Southampton and get this winning run started again, which is a great attitude to have. But this Newcastle United team has been written off or gone through difficult patches, shall we say, and have bounced back. Brentford, 4-2 defeat, bounced back, 9-game winning run. They'll do the same again. They've got a wonderful spirit there. They've got a wonderful bloke in charge of them, and they've got really, really good people in that team and squad, and that'll be enough to drag them through. Southampton obviously are improving slightly under Juric. I can see us going down to St Mary's and turning them over, but I'd take a 1-0 right now. Just get 3 points, get back on the board, turn around to Fulham at home the week after, happy days, then move into that huge Arsenal game in the Carabao Cup. But it was.
I think sometimes it's. I don't want to say it's a wake up call in terms of the Bournemouth game, but it does just bring it back to earth a little bit, because when you win, I'm sure when you win 9 games in a row, you've all this press and talking to the media, you can't help but think, well, we are class. But there are moments where we haven't been, like even against Wolves, that we weren't necessarily class at all, to be honest. So I think it might just bring things back down to earth, and reset
it's that
again.
Balancing act of they talked about how much confidence there was in that team in that 9-game win, and that's brilliant. If you're fostering confidence and generating confidence in a team, wonderful. But Eddie had said, I think it was the presser before Wolves, or maybe even the week before. No, it was the Wolves one, and he said, I know it sounds a bit strange, but I'm going to guard against complacency straight away, because this team has to keep at it. And there is no way in hell that I or anyone else, I think, should ever suggest that Newcastle went into that game against Bournemouth complacent. But I think Bournemouth and the sheer intensity of them shocked a few people. Absolutely. And it was a tough afternoon at the office, but they'll learn more than they won't from that game. And I can't see that happening again this season. They had Eddie did the right thing in terms of what I think, and that's give them a couple of days off. You'll have seen the Instagrams from Bruno. I think Bruno was in Milan. A couple of them went out to Paris. Tino this afternoon. I love Tino a bit. It just went down south to see his family and just to reset. And he said a line to me where he said, we come back this morning, so they trained this morning, mentally refreshed. And it was that word mentally. And it was almost like that 9-game winning streak, as wonderful as it was, and the results that were in it, mentally as well as physically, that has trained you as a club and as a team. And it just needed a little bit of a reset button. And I think that Bournemouth result might have been a little bit of a mental refresh as well. But who knows? Who knows what might happen? But Southampton away is probably a good game to come back to.
Definitely is.
Fingers crossed. And as you said, hopefully has a good knock-on effect. Which takes me to our very last question for you, Andy, then before you go. We've been talking about Bournemouth, how well they played against us, how well they're doing overall. Working in the Premier League as your job, obviously mainly Newcastle. It's been a hell of a season, and I'm going to use this question to get your prediction for the end of the season. But look, I suppose how has this season? You've mentioned there 6-7 seasons under your belt so far. This has been quite a surprising season. A lot of really positive narrative around teams that are flying it and teams that aren't, which is also wonderful to see, especially particular teams from London and Manchester. How enjoyable has it been? Not mentioned. We don't need to mention any names at all. You know who you are. How enjoyable has it been for you as a season? Obviously, with Newcastle going well, particularly in the recent couple of months, but just the season overall. And with that, where do you think Newcastle will be sitting at the end of the season, and who'll be around them?
It's £1 million question, isn't it? Look, from a season perspective, it's been it's been a bit of a roller coaster again, but what Newcastle season isn't a roller coaster? I think it's been super enjoyable from the perspective that they've had to graft and they've had to really fight through a very, very difficult patch back in October, November, where results weren't coming easily, consistency wasn't coming easily, and to come through it and to put together that 9-game winning run, I think it's been so enjoyable for me because I kind of interviewing the players and speaking to them, getting to know them and everything, you kind of know what makes them tick and what doesn't. So to see them actually come through and produce that 9-game winning run was almost like justification for them to say, look, this team, when they do get it right, are a bloody good team. They are one of the best starting 11s in the Premier League when they're all on form. Alexander Isak, probably one of the best strikers, certainly one of the best strikers in Europe, if not the best on current form. And then you've got, the likes of Anthony Gordon, Sandro, Bruno, Jacob on absolutely wonderful form. Great to see him doing so well. Yeah. Joey, obviously the defence, keeping clean sheets, Sven coming back into it. So from that perspective, it's been really enjoyable to see them actually hit the straps and to see that Eddie Howe intensity, that Eddie Howe ball starting to be played again, but a new version of it. That was a wonderful, wonderful time period. And I'm under no illusion that they'll do it again this season. They will go through another run like that. Whether it's enough to force them into Champions League qualification spots, I mean, we're not talking top 4, I don't think. I think we'll be talking top 5. Yeah. I think that's a fair way to say it. Tino said this afternoon we have to aim at top 4, and that's a great attitude to have. But top 5 might qualify. Who knew Forest was going to have a season like they have?
No, yeah.
Obviously, Man City aren't. They'll come back into it. Liverpool, I think, are far and away going to be title winners. Arsenal can't string a consistent patch together. Chelsea a little bit more. I would not rule Champions League qualification out for Newcastle because if they go on a 9-10 game stretch, again, I think that might do it. But I genuinely think they'll make Europe this season. I think European qualification, if you'd said to someone in August that will be the case, I think many a Newcastle fan would have turned around and said, you know what, that and a League Cup final, hopefully against Tottenham, but a League Cup final, let's get there first. And who knows, a trophy would be wonderful. But even just a final would be absolutely tremendous in a European spot. That would be great. FA Cup's not out, obviously. We've got Birmingham away. Coming up, might be a run in that. So to make a League Cup final and to make Europe, I think Newcastle should be certainly challenging for that top 5, top 4. But I think realistically, if they were to finish 6th, I would be absolutely more than happy with that at the end of the season. And I think roughly the way things will go, I think we're about the 5th or 6th best team in that division at the minute, being realistic about it. So we shall see. But if there is a trophy in the League Cup or the FA Cup, and there's a whole bank holiday week given off in Newcastle, which there would be if Newcastle won a trophy, I mean, the entire city would stop. And I live down in Newsburn, and honest to God, I'd be a great week. That I wouldn't be in work.
It'd be great and awful because your liver would give up. That'd be the problem with it.
Oh my God, I can't afford the amount of alcohol that I'd want to drink that week if Newcastle.
Good practice. Good practice for your stag.
This is why you two are horse on it. What a wonderful way to turn it back right round to the start. Absolutely. Newcastle win a trophy, my stag do, and I get married to the woman of my dreams all in a year. That would make for a very happy Andy Sixsmith, trust me.
Absolutely.
Well, the only thing that might happen is if we do reach Europe, you might suddenly have to change from Dublin to some random location in Latvia or Moldova to get in a Europa League or a Champions League.
You've mentioned Bleecker Street Bar, and you turning up in a t-shirt, in a Newcastle shirt that comes up here. I'm there.
I'll even bring the Corinthian figures, and we could just lie down on the floor and go play.
It might be a bit weird, but I'm good with it. Very strange.
Sounds good. Andy, thank you so much for giving us the time. We've got a little bit over, but it's been great having you on. Really enjoyed all of the chat. And obviously wish you all the best for the season, the wedding plans, the stag plans, and hope that we cross paths in Dublin or in Newcastle at some point in the future. And we'd love to have you on again at some point.
Absolutely.
Really quickly, where can people find you apart from Dublin or Dalkey or all around Newcastle? And not your living room, obviously, either.
No, my new one's TikTok. Rebecca, my fiance, has had me on TikTok. She is the kind of like I said before, the brains behind me. I'm just the mouthpiece. So TikTok's my kind of go-to now on social media. Twitter, obviously, as well. So if you give me a follow on TikTok, that would be absolutely sensational. All the more, the merrier. Hopefully I don't spout too much rubbish on there, but you get behind the scenes insights into my interviews that obviously don't get broadcast in the UK. They get broadcast worldwide. So you get behind the scenes insights into that, press conferences, match days, you name it. There's loads of content on there, which hopefully I'll make a little bit of sense on. So definitely TikTok. I'm trying to frantically look on my phone now where I can't remember what my handle even is. At Andy Sixsmith TV, that's the one. On Twitter as well, although less and less people are going on that, let's face it, because it's a cesspit. But yeah, anywhere on social media, PLP. And watch Final Score as well, but you'll probably see me at Sunderland this weekend, who are taking on Plymouth.
We don't have many Sunderland observers in this.
Probably not.
Rightly so. Andy, thank you so much. We'll have links for all that in the description, guys, as well. So be sure to catch up on all of that. Andy, cheers. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks so much.
For the rest of the season.
Anytime.
That was excellent. I actually really enjoyed that. What a nice chap. But also, it's cool to hear. Like he's got it's quite a serious role, I suppose, when you're like working for the league itself. You don't get as much freedom, but I think we got quite a bit out of him, which was nice.
Bit of insight there, it was brilliant.
Yeah. And just folks, keep an eye on your TikToks because Alan's sliding into DMs left, right, and center on the TikTok these days.
Get me in trouble.
No, never. And hopefully Emma doesn't watch this particular episode, Alan, and you'll get away with it. A couple more things we want to touch on before we wrap up this week's episode. Obviously, Alan, you were at the game over Newcastle last week. Disappointing result, but good bunch of Irish mags traveling. It was a serious number, I think, for the Bournemouth game. Yeah,
there was about 25 was in Dublin Airport from 5 o'clock in the morning having a few pints. Nice. First of all, special shout out to the fiance Emma for dropping me to the airport at 4:45 in the morning and then collecting me at 6 o'clock that evening. Let's just say a little bit worse for wear, shall we say?
I can only imagine, both physically and mentally, Alan.
Yeah, I think there was 29 of us on the flight out. There was about 18 of us in the pub, and there was a couple of parents and kids who didn't want to have a pint in the morning, but we still said hello to them. Great little trip. The result wasn't to be exactly what we wanted. It was probably the worst I've ever seen Newcastle play with my own two eyes. But come here, what can you say? It was a trip away. A few pints with the lads. It is what it is. It was a blip, as we've just said. We'll get over it next week when we play Southampton.
Exactly, yeah. And as we said, Bournemouth were very good. And sometimes you just have to say better team won in the day and you move on. It does happen. Yeah. Right. Well, we do have an opportunity to bounce back at the weekend. Now, it is an away game, but if we've proven anything this season, it's that we are actually starting to be quite good away from home. Long old trip down to Southampton. But if there's ever a time to play them, kick a man when he's down, I suppose is a good phrase. They did well against Man United, but Man United are shite. Southampton are worse. I suppose just looking at it and the team, I can't imagine too much drastic changes with the selection of the team. Do you see him bringing Fabian Schär back in maybe?
That's probably the only one you can really see because we don't know what was actually wrong with Botman. I heard that he was injured. I heard he was fatigued. I heard loads of different things. Probably the only change I'd actually make. Look, nobody covered themselves in glory last week. It's an opportunity for every single player to dust themselves off and get back into the swing of things. And it's exactly what I think we would do.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think so. They are. Look, they're literally battling for survival. But even they're not battling that well. A couple of decent players. They do find goals hard to score. In general, we're a pretty solid defense. I think. We said this about Bournemouth, but we really should be. We really should have too much for them. Yes. And we're now going down there with a point to prove. I think after the weekend's defeat against Bournemouth.
Well, we absolutely have something to prove. But I watched the Southampton Man United game last week, and I was like, for 70 minutes, I was like, how are these even nearly around the relegation zone? And then the last 15 minutes happened. I'd never seen a football team capitulate as much in my whole. And I spent my life watching Newcastle play. That was the worst I'd ever seen anyone. It just fell asunder. So I think that, don't get me wrong, confidence is a massive thing. And let's be honest, Southampton aren't going to exactly be brimming with confidence. I think if you get down there and get an early goal, they'll find it very, very difficult to get back into. So I do see us getting back into the swing of it. So hopefully.
Fingers crossed indeed. And with that, there will be not one, but two meetups taking place within the Irish Mags community this weekend. Alan, tell us the details.
So the usual meetup will be in the Bleecker Street Bar in Dorset Street in Dublin, but of course up in Belfast in the Doyen on Lisburn Road, we will also be having another meetup for our Irish and Northern Irish mags. So if you're anywhere near either pubs, get yourself in. No reason not to. We're all a lovely bunch of lads. We hope.
We hope.
So, yeah, we hope.
And it helps if the result goes well. We're in a lot better form when that happens.
It really does. And
it really does. Yeah, for the mood. Class. Well, Dublin and Belfast, or Newcastle. Sorry, not Newcastle. Southampton are the places to be this weekend. So get yourselves on over there. All the details of those are on the social media channels, and you'll find it on our website, theirishmags.com. All of it in the description below, whether you're watching or listening, or all of the above. As usual, we'll be back for more Irish Madness next week. We may even be blessed with Crisho's presence if we're lucky, and we'll probably be going to have a little return to talk about transfers. And so we should be back, potentially even live to your screens next week. Keep an eye out for that. Until then, we'll say the usual, Alan. How are the lags? Slán, Guffall, and we shall see you all very soon. Say goodbye, Alan.
Slán a bhaile. Have a good one.